Welcome to A Fine Time, The Nanny Revisited. This is a podcast about The Nanny, where we recap each episode and then discuss, share our own unique take on each episode. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Debbie. Today we're talking about episode 90, The Nose Knows. As usual, we'll start with a brief summary of the episode. After a backers party, Maxwell accepts a ride home from a beautiful blonde who tries to put the moves on him, only for Fran to catch them. Traumatized by the event, Fran discussed it in therapy only to be told that she was elevating Maxwell to the status of husband, even though he's her boss, and she is the nanny. She then boasts about Dr. Miller to anyone who will listen, and even some who won't, only to have her entire opinion of him change when she witnesses him picking his nose in public. After that, she cancels her next therapy session, which Sylvia explains to Maxwell was caused by the therapist putting his hand somewhere he shouldn't have. Maxwell gets incensed and follows Fran to show his support and give the doctor a piece of his mind. After Dr. Miller explains to Fran that she did to him what she does to Maxwell, idealizing the men in her life, she leaves satisfied, and Maxwell barges in, telling the doctor he should have his license revoked for taking advantage of poor, vulnerable patients, only to learn that what Dr. Miller's offense actually was. Meanwhile, Cece's boyfriend Chandler breaks up with her for smothering him, and she ends up asking Niles to be her date to the Broadway Guild Awards, offering to pay him $250. He agrees if she buys her own corsage, but then he ends up ripping up her check after the event. Bernadette, do you have anything you want to add?
No.
All right. Would you like to take us to the living room?
Yes. So we open up in the living room. Fran is walking down the stairs in, and just quickly, a robe and curlers. And Niles is kind of at the round table cleaning. And, Fran makes the comment, "Oh, look at you working like a dog on a Saturday night. That's why, he pays you the big bucks."
Big bucks, singular.
Oh, big bucks, singular. Niles says, it's good that you're becoming an independent woman who feels comfortable staying at home, on a Saturday. But at least, you could wear thigh-high boots to make me feel good too about staying home.
Right.
And then Fran kind of taps him with what is a VHS, saying, it's time for a real tearjerker. And Niles is like, "Well, how many times can you watch James Mason walk into the ocean?" And Fran's like, no. She taped Bryant Gumbel's goodbye on the Today Show. So then it's like they sit on the couch to watch, and then there's a bit of a time jump, and we see that Niles is, crying, whereas Fran has fallen asleep on the couch. Yeah. And at first Niles is focused on the TV while he's crying. So he makes the comment of like, "Why did you make me watch this? I was just getting over Deborah Norville leaving." And then he notices Fran's already asleep. So he like takes a blanket, tucks her in and leaves. And then of course, after Niles leaves, Maxwell comes home, but he is accompanied by a blonde woman who we have never seen before. He quickly lets us know who she is, though, by thanking her. He's like, "Thank you for taking me home from the party, Danielle." And she's like very flirty, like, "Oh, the pleasure's all mine, Maxwell." And he's like, well, look at the time. It's going to be an early date tomorrow. And then Deborah gets very close. Sorry, Danielle.
Please.
Danielle, sorry.
Let's not blame me. I'm not going to break up their happy household.
Yeah. Danielle gets very close, and then like, we'll stay up all night. And Maxwell's like a bit uncomfortable. He's like, "Oh, we only just met." He's afraid he's had a little too much to drink. And then Danielle's kind of like, "You're not involved with someone, are you?" Yes, he says uncertainly. She's like, "Who?" And he's like, "I don't know."
Right.
And then And then Danielle's like, let's not tell her, okay? And like she starts kissing him. At first, he's like a bit uncomfortable, hesitant, but then he starts like actively kissing her back. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, this is at the time that Fran wakes up and starts getting up from the couch. And I don't know if you noticed, but there's from the audience an audible, like two different people going, uh-oh.
I did not notice that.
Yeah, as soon as Fran gets up and before she turns around to discover, this, like, there's audience members going, "Uh-oh." So anyway, Fran's still kind of half asleep, and so she makes her way, past Maxwell going, "Good night, mister." And then she wakes up fully realizing what's happening, and she's like, "Oh my God! In our own home?"
Exactly.
And, like, of course, Maxwell and Danielle have, like, jerked apart and, like, Fran's just going in on him. I have 3 kids upstairs that you're responsible for. There better be a good explanation for this. And Danielle's like, is this the woman you're with? And Maxwell's like, oh, of course not. This is my nanny. And he kind of like when he says of course not, kind of a mean expression in terms of like, huh, as if,
Right.
I don't know if you interpreted that, but it was
Yeah.
kind of like disgust or like at the notion. And I'm like, hey, that's
Yeah. It's
mean.
obnoxious.
Yeah. And Danielle though makes the comment, oh, she's very strict. And Fran's like, look here, honey, we don't need some cheap floozy in tight clothes turning his head around. And as she's saying this, she's kind of like gaining on, like, I don't know, she's like kind of forcing Danielle out of the front door. She's
She's like
not touching her,
chasing
but
her out.
she's like, yeah. And so after she says that line and Danielle's out the door, she closes the door and she's like, that's what I'm here for.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes back towards Maxwell. Maxwell's like, now it's not what it looks like. We were both at a banker's party. She was a guest of the host. I had a little teeny martini. And then he like stops. He's like, why am I explaining this to you? You're not my wife. And Fran just has the most like her expression is just like so shocked. Like, I can't even process that is so mean.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I'm going home to my mother. And she starts making her way upstairs and then she pauses. She's like, wait a minute. I didn't do anything wrong. She's coming here.
Yup.
And that is the opening scene. Do you have anything to add?
The super minor thing, but I noticed that the closed captioning also said that Maxwell says that he came home from a banker's party, but it definitely sounds like a backer's party.
Yeah, I think it would be make more sense for backer, but
Exactly.
yeah, closed captioning said banker.
Yeah.
So
I think
it
it
was
just
some type of like social event, and that's where he met Danielle.
correct. All right. So I'll take us into the kitchen the next morning.
Mhm.
Families
The
at
dining room.
yes, I'm sorry. Did I say kitchen? I meant dining
Yeah.
room. I meant
Mhm.
breakfast. I'll just stick with breakfast.
Mhm.
The family is at the table. Niles is in the room. Fran comes in. Good morning, everyone. Turns to Maxwell, but you.
Mhm.
And Niles is next to Maxwell, and he has a plate of baked goods, and he says, "Tart, sir." And Fran says, "Been there, done that." And
Mhm.
Maxwell asks the children to leave the room because Miss Fine and I need to discuss something in private. And the kids are like, "Oh, Dad, it's no big secret. Fran was asleep on the couch. You came home ripped with the blonde model. Then you kissed her. Fran saw you. And now you're in the doghouse. Past the Smuckers. Like, we're just going to continue the conversation."
Yeah.
And Maxwell's just like, "How did you know?" And Gracie's like, "Well, Dad, if you would just learn to trust us like Niles does, he tells us everything."
And Niall's eyes in the background are like growing big as Gracie's like throwing him under the bus.
Exactly. And he like scoops her up and is basically like, "Come along, children. Time to take some kaopectate for that verbal diarrhea."
Yeah, like he literally carries her into the kitchen.
Yeah, he like picks her up from her chair and like exactly carts her off. So now it's just Fran and Maxwell in the dining room, not the kitchen. And so Maxwell tries to explain that it's all perfectly innocent. That young lady was, and Fran's like, young, maybe the new parts. And Maxwell's like, oh, I don't know why I'm always having to defend myself to you. I'm a grown man. I can come and go as I please. And Fran's just like, I don't know who you are anymore. And he's like, I am your boss. You are the nanny. Meanwhile, she's gotten up and she's like by the the side counter, and she has her back to him at one point. And he's like, I am your boss. You are the nanny. And that is the end of the discussion. And she's like, fine, then I'll say no more. We see the camera cuts to just Maxwell sitting at the head of the table, and we see a roll bounce off his head. And he says thank you to her comment that she will say no more. I will point out that this is not the first time she has used bread as a weapon. All right. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
I do not.
All right. Would you like to take us to Dr. Miller's office?
Yes. So we are back at Dr. Miller's office for another week. And Fran is on the couch telling him, I keep seeing him with that woman over and over again in my mind. If all he wanted was a night of cheap, tawdry sex with some floozy, well, I'm already on the payroll. And the doctor's like, Fran, you don't really mean that, do you? And she kind of starts shaking her head no, but she says, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, God, how could he do this to me? And Dr. Miller's like, okay, the problem is that you're elevating him to the role of husband. So, of course, you're jealous when he behaves like a single man. And then Fran's just kind of have a dazed expression on her face. And Dr. Miller's kind of looking at her and she's like, sorry, like when you said Mr. Sheffield and husband in the same sentence, everything else sounded underwater after that point. And then so Dr. Miller explains, he's your boss. You're the nanny. And Fran's like, wow. It's like an epiphany. And Dr. Miller is kind of like, has nobody pointed this out before? And she's like, yeah, they have. But, when you're paying $140 an hour, there's more like resonance to that. And so, yeah, she has now made the realization that he is the boss and she is the nanny. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that scene?
No, I'm good.
Okay, can you take us to the living room?
So Cece comes in and she says to Niles, did my boyfriend call? And he's like, for heaven's sakes, you're almost 50. Do you have to call him your boyfriend? And she's like, well, you're just jealous because I have a lover and you have her. Gesturing to the mop or broom or whatever is in his hand.
It's like a little feather duster thing.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Sorry. It was a feather duster. Needless to say, no comparison. Maxwell comes in and he informs her that he has her ticket to the Broadway Guild Awards. And she's like, ooh, I hope there's an extra one because I'll need two. And she says that very pointedly to Niles. And she walks off with her two tickets. And Fran comes in from the front door and she greets Mr. Sheffield. And he's like, oh, Miss Fine, well, you seem to have moved past the unpleasantness of the other morning. Did you have a good therapy session? And she's like, oh, Mr. Sheffield, what goes on in a therapist's office is confidential. You really shouldn't pry into the private lives of others. And as she's walking by the table, she sees, ooh, the new People's here. She picks up the magazine, which is, its entire business model is premised on prying into the private lives of others. Anyway, so Maxwell continues saying to her that he's glad that she's feeling better. And she's like, oh, I am. Dr. Miller is a genius. He's so intelligent and insightful. I swear, I've never met a man that understood me more. She sits on the couch. Maxwell sits on the table across from her. And he's like, ooh, sounds like someone might have a little crush on their therapist. And she's like, sounds to me like someone is a little jealous. You see what you're doing, don't you? You are elevating me to the status of wife. That's why you can't stand to see me act like a beautiful single woman. And I think she's gotten up at this point and she walks over to the mirror and he's like, oh, I can assure you, Miss Fine, I'm not jealous. She's like, denial. He's like, I'm not in denial. Denying denial, she says.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so he's like following her around and he asks her, well, what was the breakthrough your genius therapist brought you to? She stops, turns around, faces him. You are my boss, and I am your nanny. And Maxwell's like, and that is what I'm paying $140 an hour for? I said the same thing to you just the other day. She's like, yes, but you said it with anger. You really must learn to communicate in a way that I can absorb. The camera shifts to just her, and we see a roll bounce off her head as well.
Yes,
You got anything you want to add?
I do not.
All right. Would you like to take us to the movie theater?
Yes, so we're at the movie theater and Val, Fran, and Yetta are there. And while Val's ordering, Fran's talking to Yetta, saying, when the movie starts, turn up your hearing aid. And Yetta makes a comment, they've got sound now.
Mm-hmm.
So after Val's done, it's Fran's turn, and Fran orders a large popcorn, no butter, no oil, dry, air popped with a Diet Coke. And like the guy behind the counter kind of dryly was like, anything else? And she's like, yes, goobers, large Snickers, and nachos with extra cheese. And
Yep.
Val's like, you can eat all of that in the zone? And Fran's like, really, like, actually, it's the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Um, and Val's like, at that time, she has an ice cream in her hand, like an
Mhm.
ice cream stick. And she's like, why can't I lose weight? Maybe I should go see the therapist. That's the only thing I haven't tried except diet and exercise.
Right.
And Fran's going on and on about how much of a genius, Dr. Miller is. He's the next Sigmund Freud. And yet is like, oh, yes, he's an excellent doctor. And Fran's like, you've seen Dr. Miller? And she's like, no, Freud.
Right.
That's who she's referring to. And then Fran spots Dr. Miller in the lobby of the movie theater. And she's like, oh, should I go say hi? Or like, if he asks how I am and I answer, is he going to charge me? And then, like, I think Valor Yetta comments about how excited Fran is. And she's like, well, we're in the presence of a genius. Like, I only hope one day I can be as confident and brilliant and sophisticated as that man. And Yetta's like, you mean the one picking his nose?
Right.
And at first, Fran's like, not really, hasn't seen that. But then she turns and see it. And she's like, oh, now he's really digging. And Val's commenting about how it's so nice to be so comfortable with yourself, And Yetta's like, is he trying to pick his own brain? And anyway, so like, I mean, they're commenting, obviously. We don't see him picking his nose, like, actively. But
There's
they're
a scene,
commenting on
they like cut to him and they like, you see like his hand in
hand. Yeah.
his face and like his arm up, which
Yeah, but not actively like up there. So that we see. But anyway, at this point, he turns around, spots Fran, and he reaches out his hand for a handshake, and Fran panics, throws Val under the bus by quickly putting Val's hand in Dr. Miller's hand. Like, oh, have you met Val?
yeah.
So it's a very awkward run-in with Dr. Miller out in the wild.
Oh,
Do
absolutely.
you have anything to add to that scene?
I do not.
Okay, can you take us to the kitchen?
Sure. So Sylvia's there and she asks Fran, honey, what are you doing home? Don't you have therapy now? And Fran's like, oh no, I canceled it. And she explains that she's become very disillusioned with Dr. Miller. And she makes a Brady Bunch reference that I didn't truly understand.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so Sylvia asks, honey, what did the doctor do? And Fran's like, oh, Ma, something so repulsive and disgusting, I can't even talk about it. Ma, he picked his nose in public. And Sylvia, she's sitting at the kitchen table and she's eating a very heavily iced cupcake. And she's like, oh, some people are so unaware about how they look to other people. And she's like getting frosting on her face. And anyway, it's one of those great nanny comparisons. And so Fran's like, oh, Ma, swear you're not going to tell Mr. Sheffield. I built this guy up to be such a genius that I don't want to look like a schmagegi, And Sylvia's like, sweetheart, you live with him. You raise his 3 children without a ring on your finger. You're already a schmagegi. And Fran's like, Ma, that is my job. I happen to be a childcare professional. And then we hear from off screen, I think it's either Grace or Maggie shouting, Fran. And Fran's like, what's that? And Sylvia's like, oh, it's one of the kids calling. She's like, Fran's like, oh, coming. And she races up the back stairs. And Maxwell comes in asking Niles for something. And then he sees Sylvia. It's like, oh, never mind. Ah, Sylvia, if you're looking for your daughter, she's on her way to therapy. And Sylvia's like, oh, no, she's upstairs. She's not going to that doctor anymore. And Maxwell's like, why? What happened? And Sylvia's, still eating. She's like, well, he did something very inappropriate. She doesn't want me to tell you. She's afraid you'll overreact. And he's like, what did he do? She's like, well, let's just say he put his hand someplace he shouldn't have. Oh my God, is the response from Maxwell. And nobody's going to do anything about it? And Sylvia's like, what are you going to do? Call the police? Then they'd have to arrest every man on the subway. And Maxwell is still incensed and Sylvia's blasé about it at this point.
Yeah. She's done nothing to steer him in the right direction.
Well, I mean, what she said is not technically wrong.
Yeah, exactly. But it's clear to the audience how he's interpreting what she is saying.
Correct. Do you have anything you want to add?
I do not.
All right. Would you like to take us to the front of the house or the foyer?
Yes. So Niles is there cleaning once again, and Cece walks in through the door. And Niles like, oh, look at you. You look very 60s. And Cece's like, it's Dolce and Gabbana. And Niles is like, I was talking about your face. And then he picks up an envelope, this came for you. And Cece's asking, like, why are there so many creases? And he's like, oh, it was stuck in the mailbox. And Cece's like, I'm talking about your neck.
Mm-hmm.
So she makes a comment, oh, things are really heating up with Chandler. It's a key to his apartment. And then she takes out the note, reads it. Dear Cece, you're suffocating me. Here's your key back.
Oh.
And now it's like, oh, you poor thing. Now you have no date for the award ceremony Saturday. And Cece's like, that ungrateful. I waited on him hand and foot every morning at 6:30. I brought him a hot latte. I called him 40 times a day to make sure that he was eating right. How can he say I was suffocating him? And again, Niles is like, poor thing. I can't imagine anything more humiliating. And Cece's like, oh yeah? What are you doing Saturday night?
Mm-hmm.
And Niles is like, what makes you think I would be caught dead at an award ceremony with you? Cece's like, $250. And he's like, pick me up at 8 and buy yourself a corsage. I don't want to look chintzy.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the little scene.
They have a date. Look at that. All right, so I'll take us to Fran's room. Fran's sitting at her vanity, and Maxwell knocks, asking if she's decent. She's like, yeah, but I can get indecent in a minute. And he comes into her room and he says that he wanted to let her know that what her therapist did was reprehensible and that he supports her 100%. And Fran's like, how could Ma have told you? I left her with so much food. And Maxwell asks her if she wants to talk about it. And she's like, oh, Mr. Sheffield, it's just that I always thought of Dr. Miller as being so professional with such impeccable character. I would have never thought he'd do anything so disgusting. And Maxwell's like, the man should have his license revoked. And Fran's like, oh, I don't know about that. I mean, all guys need to do it now and then, but usually they have the decency to wait until they get into the car first. And Maxwell just kind of looks at her like he's confused, but he's still like thinking what he's been thinking this whole time. Do you want to add?
No, I do not.
All right, would you like to take us to the waiting room outside Dr. Miller's office?
Yeah, it's kind of hallway-esque. Um, but Fran's there, and there's also a man. And, she goes near him, I think to pick up like a magazine or something.
Right.
And he's sitting and he's like, "Oh, I don't mean to be presumptuous, but you are one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen." And Fran's like, "Well, thanks. You seem like a pretty normal guy, or guy who has it together. And, what are you here for?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm a compulsive liar," which is
Mm-hmm.
ouch. The
Yep.
implication there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, after this exchange, Maxwell shows up and he wants to give Dr. Miller a piece of his mind. And then he's also kind of confused why Fran's there because, like, "I thought you were no longer coming here." And she's like, "Well, I want to confront him. And since you already paid for the session, I also wanted to confront the trauma of seeing my parents in bed." And Max was like, "Having sex?" And she's like, "No, whitefish."
Mm-hmm.
Um, anyway, Fran goes on to say, she wants to kind of handle the situation like an adult. She's about to go in, and then she turns to Maxwell like, "But can I have a little huggy poo first?" So
Mm-hmm.
they hug, and then she goes in, and at that time, the man, the compulsive liar, goes up to Maxwell like, "Are you Maxwell Sheffield, the producer? I've seen every show. You're brilliant." And of course, like, Maxwell's kind of puffing up, eating it all up.
Yep.
Um, Now, how did you count this?
I counted that as the end of the scene, but we can do
Okay.
it however
Yeah.
you'd like.
No, no. Take us into Dr. Miller's office.
So Fran sits down and Dr. Miller is sitting across from her and he asks her if she enjoyed the movie. And she's like, not really. Thank God I bought a box of boogers. I mean, goobers. And he looks at her and he's like, "You seem a bit anxious." And she's like, "Well, I do have something on my mind. And I just find it so difficult articulating that I saw you picking your nose." And he's like,
And it's very accusatory with her eyes, too.
yeah, like her voice drops, her eyes narrow, like focusing on him. And
Hmm.
he's like, "You did? And you found that so offensive?" And she's like, "Yeah, I could vomit." And he's like,
Hmm.
"You catch me doing something perfectly human, and now you've changed your entire opinion just because you saw me with my finger in my nose." And he like has a box of mints and he's opened it and he has taken one out between his thumb and forefinger and offers it to her. And she just gives him like this dirty look, like this dirty
Yeah.
slash incredulous look, like, "You got to be kidding me. I know where that finger's been."
Yeah. There's like a pretty like lengthy back and forth staring during this time where he's kind of offering, takes back, kind of offers, and she's just giving him that dirty look.
Right. And ultimately he gives up, puts the mint back in the case, closes it, puts it down, back on the side table. And he's like, "Well, don't you see what you're doing? You're doing the same thing to me as you do to Mr. Sheffield. It's very common in a woman to idealize the men in her life, hoping that she will find one as perfect as her father." And she's like, "Oh, you're right, doctor. A guy who sleeps all day, wears a bad wig, and stinks of chopped liver, he doesn't fall off trees." Um,
Mhm. Yep.
that's where I cut the
Yeah.
scene. Okay.
Yeah. Because then we're back in the hallway with Maxwell, who is still talking to the compulsive liar, unbeknownst to him.
Correct.
Um, and the man saying, "No way you're old enough to have a 17-year-old daughter." And Maxwell, who is clearly loving this conversation, is like, "Sincerely, I'm 44 years old." And that's when Fran comes back into the hallway. So Maxwell gets up to kind of see, how things went. And Fran says, "I explained what he did. He explained that what he did wasn't so wrong. Men are human, and he had an itch and he had to scratch it." And
Mm-hmm.
Maxwell is so angry by this. Like, that is such, a crock, let me get in there. Or, yeah. What do you think you are, uh, Lon? Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
So he wants to go in and then he goes in. So I
yeah,
don't know how you want to count this.
I counted this all as one scene, so
Okay.
keep going.
Yeah. So he barges in. And so, like, Dr. Miller, who is sitting in his normal seat, is kind of like startled to see him come in, kind of gets up. And he's like, what do you think you are, to deny this woman? Oh, uh, okay. My notes are weird. Okay.
Okay, so
You should have, but essentially he's like, you should have your license revoked, and Dr. like Miller's like very confused, he's like, oh, you must be looking for Dr. Pepkin. And he's like, I'm looking for the doctor who takes advantage of poor, vulnerable patients. And Dr. Miller's like, yep, that's Pepkin. Like,
Mhm.
kind of matter of factly, like, yeah, this is, run of the mill.
Yeah,
And
which is kind of
Maxwell,
strange.
yeah, Maxwell's telling Fran to stand back, because he intends to, um, like he's gearing up to kind of fight physically, right?
Right,
And Fran's like, why?
he's gonna teach him a lesson.
Yeah. Fran's like, why are you acting so macho like an animal? It's good.
Yeah.
Uh, and Dr. Miller kind of turns to Fran like, does everybody in your life react to like this to, picking your nose? And Max was like, damn right, because he's all in the moment. And then he's like, excuse me a moment.
Mhm.
And kind of confirms with like, with Fran about it. Like, like, is that what happened? Like, yeah, what did you think happened? Not that. Well, where did you get that idea from? He's like, the same place I get all my idiotic Michigana ideas, uh, you know, from you.
Mhm.
But like initially it's Sylvia, not Fran. So that's a little bit,
Incorrect.
incorrect. But he's yelling his classic way at her. And again, he's saying like, he could end up in a bloody institution with, how much this makes him go crazy. And Fran turns to Dr. Miller and like, see how he yells at me and makes me feel, this big. Um, to, try to, this is why I elevate him to husband with that kind of behavior. And so like Maxwell and Fran are leaving, and in the hallway that compulsive lighter says, you're the most beautiful, most perfect couple I've ever seen. And at first Fran, like, because Maxwell asks who that man is, and at first Fran is about to, you can tell, say that he's a compulsive lighter. She rethinks that and instead says, he's a well-respected marriage counselor, because she would like that to not be a lie, right?
Right. Actually, she says he happens to be one of the most well-respected marriage counselors in the business, not just a marriage counselor.
Yes, a well-respected marriage counselor.
Mm.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to that scene?
No.
Okay, take us to the living room.
So it's clearly Saturday night. It's after the award ceremony. Niles and Cece are all dolled up and they're dancing. And she comments on, oh, what a night. I don't know how I had the presence of mind to keep my acceptance speech down to 30 seconds. And he's like, you didn't thank anyone. She's like, oh, right. Oh, Niles, thank you for escorting me. You're actually almost charming when you're not being a mean, miserable old man. And he's like, funny. I was going to say the same about you. I'm really glad this little fling between you and Chandler is over. And she's like, oh, he's like, yeah, he was beneath you. To which she says, not anymore. And she pulls
Mm-hmm.
aside, she digs out her purse and she says, oh, I almost forgot. Here is your check. He takes the check from her, rips it up, drops the pieces and says, this one's on me. They go back dancing and he dips her.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep. And that's the episode.
exactly. So
Yeah. So yeah, I would just say he kind of like tosses it up too. So it kind of rains down like confetti in a
mhm.
way.
Which is
Yeah,
funny because he's going to be the one to clean that up.
that's true. Yep. Um, So before we get into the shticks, is there anything you want to discuss?
I don't think so. Do you have anything?
Nope, we can jump right into favorite fashion. Uh, did you have any of this episode?
I had things I did not like. So I have my
Yeah.
favorite fashion. How about that?
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
I did not like the gingham suit that Fran wore to therapy, where she's explaining, that she keeps seeing images of him with that woman in her mind. I also didn't care for her wig in that scene. I also didn't care for what she wore to the therapist's office. And the last time we're there in this episode, it's that black and white suit. It's like a black suit with like white, almost like ribbon, except it's all one. It's like not like separate. It's like there, and like I couldn't make out what the words said on the white. It's like basically if she had like white masking tape like wrapped around her arm and like down her outfit, and like there's words, but I couldn't read what they were. If I had to pick a favorite outfit, I think I'm gonna go with what Fran wore to the movies, which I like the color. It's the neon green. She's wearing, her usual black like leggings or tights, and then she has like the black turtleneck, and then she has like a neon green dress, and then over that she has a neon green, black and white jacket. There's slim pickings in this episode. How about you?
Yeah, again, I didn't really have much of a favorite. I would have to say if I had to pick anything, I would actually go with Cece's dress in the last scene.
I knew you were going to say
that. Because
You wanna
it's like
describe
as it's a floor length
it?
sequin. Would you say it's black or really dark blue?
I would
got
actually say
black.
neither. I kind of thought it was like brown.
Huh. It's a dark color. And
Yeah.
it's kind of sequency, right?
Yeah, it's kind of shiny.
It has like a halter. Was it a halter
Yep.
neckline?
Yes.
And her
like
hair was up, and it was a pretty simple but classy kind of dress. So yeah, added to the romantic atmosphere of that last scene.
Very much so.
But yeah, other than that, I didn't really have a favorite.
There wasn't that much in this episode. I mean, there's also a black and white dress that she's wearing when she tells her mother what happened. When Fran tells her mother what happened, that's okay. It's interesting how Fran had multiple hairdos in this episode.
Yeah.
We're seeing in this season that she's wearing her hair / wigs very differently. So
yes. Yep.
All right. Would you like to take us to some notable New Yorkers?
Yeah. Like, I feel like this episode also didn't have a ton, by way of notable New Yorkers. I mean, there were some.
Agreed.
But like I feel like some episodes have more. But in the first scene, we do have a couple in that she mentioned, or Niles makes the comment about how many times can you watch James Mason walk into the ocean?
So James Mason was an English actor who died in 1984, who's known for roles in A Star is Born and North by Northwest. That's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Then Fran, says that no, she taped Bryant Gumbel's goodbye on the Today Show.
Bryant Gumbel, an American journalist and sportscaster known for co-hosting the Today Show on NBC for 15 years. That's according to our friends at Wikipedia. And just to clarify, I believe the James Mason walking into the ocean is also a reference to A Star is Born.
And then there's a reference to Deborah Norville.
Deborah Norville was an American businesswoman and TV journalist who anchors Inside Edition, and she's been doing that since 1995. Before that, she was a co-host on Today. That's according to our friends at Wikipedia. We should mention the Today Show is an American television show that airs weekdays from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. on NBC and has been doing so since 1952. That's
Oh,
also
wow. I didn't realize it was that long running.
I didn't either, so that's why I wanted to mention it.
Did you happen to look up who the actress was who played Danielle?
Oh, I did not, but that's a really good
I
idea.
didn't either. Like
Um,
I didn't recognize her from any other works. I don't know if you did.
I did not. But I'm also, as we know, terrible with actors and actresses. She is a film star who's, according to our friends IMDb, she started with a starring role in an HBO comedy, romantic comedy called Amore, or Amore, I guess. Let's see, other things she is known for, on my mind, The Nanny. Let's see, other things she has been in, Follow Your Heart, Passions. She was on Days of Our Lives for one episode. Yeah, I'm truly not knowing a lot of the things that she's been in.
Okay.
Oh, she was also in one episode of The Bold and the Beautiful.
Okay. So there's the soap opera tie-in. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you put Niall's reference to the kaopectate or not.
Oh, I did. It's a medication used to treat stomach problems and diarrhea. And that's according to our friends at webmd.com.
You mentioned, in your section, People is a magazine that has to do with like celebrities and all of that.
I'm going to interject. Smuckers. One of the kids asks to pass the Smuckers. It's a brand that produces fruit spreads, syrups, peanut butters, and ice cream toppings. It was founded, do you want to try to guess what century it was founded in? You're like, that's not fair. You're right.
The 19th century.
Yes, it was founded in 1897.
Wow.
That's according to our friends at smuckers.com. That's why I mentioned it, because I had no idea.
Now, my question for you, okay, because when they're in line and Fran orders everything, Val makes the comment, you can eat all of that in the zone.
That's a diet that focuses on, and I quote, the relationship between diet-induced inflammation and chronic disease to slow the rate of aging. And that's according to our friends at zonediet.com.
And then, Fran replies, in the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone was an American science fiction show that presented stories of characters dealing with unusual or disturbing events. That's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Now, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you mentioned you weren't quite sure what the reference was to Mrs. Brady dating Greg.
Yeah.
I think, and I could be wrong, so lovely listeners, correct us if I'm wrong. There were like rumors that like Florence Henderson, who played Mrs. Brady, like dated the actor who played Greg Brady, which would be the oldest son. But I think those are just like rumors. I don't know if that was ever like confirmed or anything like that. But I think that's why she would have been disillusioned with that kind of like finding out about that kind of relationship or something.
Oh,
Because
interesting.
it would just seem improper.
Got it. Thank you. Because I was just like, I know this is a Brady Bunch reference, but I don't understand it. So thank you. I did also look up Goobers and Snickers if you want those.
Sure.
So Goobers is, and I quote, fresh roasted peanuts covered in milk chocolate, and quote, they started being manufactured in the state of North Carolina in 1925.
Wow.
I'm just pulling up all these random facts for our lovely listeners. That's according to our friends at oldtimecandy.com. As for Snickers, it's a milk chocolate candy with a nougat, caramel, and peanuts. And that's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Then Cece has a Dolce and Gabbana outfit.
So it's
Sorry,
Dolce.
Dolce.
It's
Sorry.
Dolce and Gabbana is an Italian luxury fashion house that specializes in items that are ready to wear, plus accessories and cosmetics. And that's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
You skipped Sigmund Freud.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
It's okay. He can't mind. He's no longer with us.
Mhm.
He is an Australian neurologist who is known as the founder of psychoanalysis. And that's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm. And then, did you find out which song was playing in the living room at that last scene? Because the lyrics were "Love is here to stay."
It's
That's
very
the first
clear. Our
one.
love is here to stay. Yeah. It's a song composed by George Gershwin for the film The Goldwyn Follies back in 1938. And that's according to our friends at Wikipedia. Love is here to stay. It's the title.
Mhm. Is there anything else you had on your list?
I'm double checking. Nope, I think we're good.
Okay. So time for Yiddish cop.
Yeah, so we had a couple.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is the word schmagegi, which
Mm-hmm.
I gotta tell you is just such a pleasant thing to say. I would translate it to like a crazy or foolish, a stupid person. According to our friends at vocabulary.com, they define it more closely to like baloney or hot air or nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. Meshuggah, I would also say it means crazy, like insane. Yeah. And then the last one was chintzy, which means cheap.
Okay.
And I don't actually think it's Yiddish for the record.
Yeah.
So, but
When Fran says whitefish in the bed,
yeah.
it's like literally whitefish.
Whitefish, it's like probably whitefish salad, which is like, it's kind of like, think of like prepared, like you go to a grocery store and they have the prepared food section or the
Mm-hmm.
prepared food counter. You could buy like a pound whitefish. And actually as a throwback, back in season 2, in the episode I always want to refer to as The Garbage Man Cometh, but I know that's not the title. The title is Pishki Business. Niles bought, beluga caviar, which was, $1 million an ounce or whatever. And Fran's like, I've got a shopping tip for you, Niles. Whitefish, $1.99. You can fill your whole bathtub. That's what she's talking about.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So are you ready for some 90s nostalgia?
I will say one last thing because I can't.
Oh, sorry.
No, just because you asked about whitefish, whitefish would be a kosher fish because it has fins and scales. So,
Okay. 90s nostalgia?
yes, ma'am. Old cars.
Yeah. Yep. Also like taping, on a
Yeah.
VHS, like something like I know I personally had a bunch of VHSs that I taped like
Oh, I
shows
think
on and
everyone
stuff.
did.
Yeah, like
This was
a whole bunch.
this was before streaming. This was before
Yeah.
podcasts. So you had to like
Hmm.
find your entertainment elsewhere.
Yeah. Yep.
How about the price of Fran's therapy sessions is 140
Yeah.
an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be a lot more today. It
Absolutely.
just seems like, especially lately, everything's just been going up so much. It's nuts.
Yeah. So just as an example, according to our friends at Zen Care, about looking for a therapist in New York City, they say that and I quote, the average therapy session costs between $175 and $200 per session.
Mm-hmm.
That's in New York City where she'd be getting her therapy now. So yeah.
Yep. Is there anything else that kind of stuck out to you in this episode?
I think we get a good look at I think as usual, we see the old computer in Dr. Milner's office, which looks
Mhm.
old. And the movie theater to me looked very dated.
Yeah. Yeah, it did.
Then I'm out.
Okay. Yeah, me too. Um, so we unfortunately can't add to any kiss counts.
Not this week.
Um, there was no overt reference to the thing, I don't
Not this
think.
week.
So we are at future fun.
That we are, that we are. Okay, so let's see. The first thing I want to say is so in just a couple weeks, we're going to see Max will get a lot of really good publicity for his new play called The Widower, which is going to actually be nominated for 5 Tony Awards. He actually takes home multiples. So this ties in with the guy saying, "Oh, you're brilliant," Maxwell actually is brilliant. The plot of The Widower is basically about a man who's widowed in the prime of his life and basically, vows never to love again, despite the, beautiful governess who's raising his kids and everything.
Mhm.
And Sylvia says to Fran, "What do you need, a house to fall on you?" And like, have you gotten the message? And Fran's like, "I don't know what happened. I was sobbing hysterically through the end of the play."
Mhm.
So that's one thing. I do want to point out that in season 6, Niles and Fran are going to actually impersonate Maxwell and Cece as Niles tries to woo Miss Babcock.
Ooh.
The problem with that is that they end up violating pretty much every theater code, and they end up getting Maxwell and Cece's business fined $250,000.
Wow.
And they do it really quickly. And then finally, the last thing I want to mention is about next week. So you made a good point in the very first scene, where Fran is just like, after Maxwell says, like, "You're not my wife, I don't have to explain myself to you," or whatever. And she's like, "Oh, that's just it's so mean. I can't even process that." Well, next week, he says something, where he says to her that he wishes he never told her he loved her in the first place. And
Wow.
she just, like, is very similar reaction. She said, "Oh, my whole nervous system just shut down. I can't see. I cannot see." And she, like, walks very gingerly from the room.
Mhm.
He does go on to eat those words, by the way.
Mhm. Yeah.
So yeah, that's the future fun I had queued up for us.
Okay. So now it's time for episode ratings. As a reminder, we rate each episode from 1 to 5 lipsticks, with 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. But it's also somewhat arbitrary, and we reserve the right to change our ratings at a later date. This week it's my turn to go first.
Yes.
And so I was like contemplating it because I love all the CC Niles in this.
Mhm.
But then, as we kind of mentioned, like I wasn't a fan of how like Maxwell reacted to like the idea that Danielle's like, "Oh, is this the woman you're with?" And he kind of looked somewhat disgusted at the
Mhm.
like. It was weird. Um, I don't know. And the whole like nose picking was like again very exaggerated and all that kind of stuff. But again, really appreciate the Niles and CC content. So I'm going to give it a 4.75. What about you?
So despite Maxwell's apparent disgust at the idea that Fran is the woman he's involved with, I really do like this episode. I think it's funny. The timing is very good. I like the, I guess, symmetry of it. Fran goes from, absolutely horrified at Maxwell, throwing bread at him. Then he throws bread at her. Then she goes to therapy and she, is placated, and and she starts building up her therapist only to have that crash down because he's human. And then of course Maxwell tries to like defend her honor. Which I guess I don't, as I'm saying that, I don't like how that sounds, but like the fact that he cares enough about her that he feels like she's been taken advantage of and he wants to do something about it. I like that. Only to then find out he picked his nose. So I'm actually giving this one a 5.
Okay.
So
yeah. That's fair. Like I said, I had to think about it.
Yeah, I know. Like, is this the best episode in the series? No. But it is pleasant to watch. It is fun. And I will also add a shout out to the Niall Cece burgeoning romance, if you will.
Yeah.
So I like that. But I guess as another piece of future fun, we've got a long way to go, guys. We've got a long way to go. So yeah, it gets a 5 in my book.
I feel like every couple of like seasons we get like a little crumb of CC Niles.
Correct. The last one, I mean, in fairness, we sort of got a little crumb of it last week.
Oh yeah. With him like being so upset about her having a boyfriend.
Exactly. But yeah, so it gets a 5.
Awesome. Is there anything you'd like to discuss further or say before we sign off for this week?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm good as well.
All right. Well, that's all we have for you today. We hope you had a fine time with us as we revisited The Nanny. Join us next week when we'll be discussing episode 91, The Bank Robbery.
If you'd like to reach us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at Nanny Revisited. You can also send us email at afinetimenannyrevisited@gmail.com. Have a great week.